Before we dive into today's video, I have created a submit form for people out there who want to share their scariest encounters. For those who do share, it could be featured in future videos. Now, let's get into today's video. After 10 hours on the road, I was exhausted and ready to collapse. The flickering neon sign of Sunset Lodge loomed ahead, a beacon in the darkness. The motel looked like it had seen better days, its paint peeling and windows dark, but I didn't care. I just needed a bed for the night. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot and made my way to the office. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, and a musty smell hit me. Behind the counter sat an old man with a gaunt face and hollow eyes, his gaze barely lifting as I approached.
"Room for one?"
he asked, his voice raspy. "Yes, just for tonight," I replied, handing over my credit card. He slid a tarnished key across the counter, the number 12 barely legible on the tag.
"Room 12.
He muttered, not meeting my eyes.
Last one available. Checkout's at 11.
I nodded, taking the key and heading back to my car. A chill ran down my spine as I walked through the dimly lit lot to room 12, situated at the end of a long row of identical doors. The place had an eerie, abandoned feel to it, like it was holding its breath. The door creaked as I opened it, and a damp, stale odor wafted out. The room was small and sparsely furnished. A bed with a faded quilt, a nightstand with a flickering lamp, and a dresser with a cracked mirror. I tossed my bag onto the bed and sat down, the mattress sagging under my weight. As I settled in, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The room seemed too quiet, too still. I turned on the TV for some background noise, but all I got was static. Frustrated, I turned it off and lay back, staring at the ceiling. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic thumping coming from the walls. It grew louder, accompanied by muffled voices and distant, eerie chanting. My heart raced as I sat up and listened. The sounds seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing through the thin walls. I got up and pressed my ear to the wall, trying to make out the words. The chanting was low and guttural, like some kind of ritual. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead as I realized the voices weren't coming from the room next door. They were coming from beneath me. I yanked open the door and looked out into the parking lot. It was deserted, the other rooms dark and silent. The only light came from the flickering sign at the front of the motel. I considered leaving, but curiosity got the better of me. I needed to know what was going on. I crept down the row of rooms, the chanting growing louder as I neared the office. The door was slightly ajar, and a dim light spilled out. I peered inside and saw the old man from the counter, along with a few others, gathered around a table covered with strange symbols and candles. They were chanting in unison, their eyes closed, swaying back and forth. Suddenly, one of them looked up and saw me. His eyes widened in surprise, and he shouted something in a language I didn't understand. The others turned to look at me, their expressions shifting from shock to anger. I backed away, but before I could run, two of them grabbed me and dragged me into the office. "Let me go!" I shouted, struggling against their grip, but they were too strong, and they pulled me toward the back of the office, where a trapdoor led down into a basement. I tried to resist, but one of them hit me hard on the back of the head, and everything went black. When I came to, I was in a small, dimly lit room, tied to a chair. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books and strange artifacts. The old man stood in front of me, a sinister smile on his face.
"You shouldn't have snooped around,"
he said, his voice cold.
"Now you're going to be a part of our ritual." We need a sacrifice to keep our power strong.
I struggled against the ropes, panic rising in my chest. Please let me go. I won't tell anyone, I promise. He shook his head, his smile widening.
It's too late for that. You were meant to be our next victim, the moment you stepped into room 12. It's a special room, you see. It draws in those who are meant to be sacrificed.
I thrashed against the ropes, but they held tight. The other cult members gathered around, their chanting growing louder and more intense. The air grew thick with the smell of incense and something else, something metallic and foul. As they prepared their ritual, I realized I had to find a way out, or I would never see the light of day again. Desperation gave me strength, and I strained against the ropes with all my might. The chair creaked, and I felt the ropes begin to give. With one final effort, I broke free and lunged at the old man, knocking him to the ground. The other cult members rushed at me, but I grabbed a candle from the table and swung it at them, sending hot wax flying. They recoiled, giving me just enough time to run for the stairs. I raced up the steps and burst into the office, my heart pounding. I didn't stop to look back as I ran to my car, fumbling for the keys. The engine roared to life, and I sped out of the parking lot, the cult members' shouts fading into the night behind me. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the motel's sign flickering in the distance. I knew I couldn't go to the police. They would never believe my story. I just had to keep moving, never stopping for too long, always looking over my shoulder. Even now, as I sit in a different motel room, far from that cursed place, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching, waiting for their next victim. And I know that someday, they might find me again. Over time, I think about that motel at least once a year, thinking and hoping that if anyone else staying in that motel does not experience the same thing I did.
I had been driving for hours, the rhythmic hum of my tires on the asphalt almost lulling me to sleep. It was late, and the rain blurred my vision, making the road ahead seem like a dark, endless tunnel. When my car's engine began to sputter and cough, my heart sank. I pulled over to the side of the road, desperately hoping I wasn't stranded in the middle of nowhere. As luck would have it, I saw a dimly lit sign flickering through the rain, Whispering Pines Motel. It looked perfectly ordinary, the kind of place you might find off any highway, a two-story building with a few scattered cars in the lot and a neon sign that buzzed faintly. Relieved, I grabbed my bag and made my way to the office, the rain soaking through my clothes. The motel's office was a small, cozy room with a counter and a few chairs. A middle-aged man with a warm smile greeted me.
Need a room for the night?
He asked. Yes, please. My car broke down just down the road, I replied, handing over my credit card. He nodded sympathetically, checking me in quickly.
You're in room 8. Breakfast is served from 6 to 9. Let me know if you need anything.
He handed me the key, and I thanked him, grateful for a place to rest. The room was surprisingly nice, clean, with fresh linens and a comfortable bed. I settled in, feeling the tension of the drive melt away. After a hot shower, I felt ready to collapse. But as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard a faint sound outside my window. Curious, I got up and peeked through the curtains. There was a woman standing near her car, a look of confusion on her face. She seemed to be searching for something, her head turning this way and that. I watched as she began walking towards the woods at the edge of the property. Something about the way she moved struck me as odd, like she was being drawn by an invisible force. I shrugged it off, figuring she might have lost her way in the dark. I closed the curtains and got back into bed, the sound of the rain soothing me. I woke in the middle of the night to a loud bang. My heart pounded as I sat up, disoriented and scared. The noise came again, a desperate, frantic pounding on my door. "Help! Please, help me!" a voice screamed. I rushed to the door, opening it a crack to see a man in his 40s, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "It's coming for me! Please, you have to let me in!" he shouted. "What's coming?" I asked, bewildered. "I don't know. It's out there in the dark. It took my wife. Please, you have to help me." He was almost incoherent with terror, his eyes darting towards the parking lot where the darkness seemed to throb with menace. I opened the door wider, but as I did, something moved in the shadows behind him. It was quick, almost too fast to see, and before I could react, the man was yanked into the darkness with a blood-curdling scream. The door slammed shut, and I stood frozen, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. I locked the door and backed away, my mind racing. What had I just seen? My hands shook as I grabbed my phone, but there was no signal. I was alone and trapped. The only thing I could think to do was stay inside, as the man in the office had suggested. But the night was far from over. I heard more noises, people shouting, running, pleading for help. I looked out the window again and saw them, the other guests of the motel, being dragged into the darkness by something unseen. The terror on their faces mirrored my own, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. I couldn't just sit there and wait to be next. Grabbing the lamp from the bedside table, I made my way to the office, determined to find out what was happening. The office was empty, the man from earlier nowhere to be found. The small room felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in on me. I rummaged through the desk, searching for anything that might help. My fingers brushed against a stack of papers, registration forms, each one with a different name but all ending in a red X. My heart pounded as I realized these were the names of people who had stayed at the motel, people who had never left. The man from the office wasn't the owner, I realized with a jolt. He was a prisoner, just like me, trying to warn others but ultimately powerless to stop the horrors that unfolded each night. I turned on every light in the office, hoping to stave off the darkness. The shadows seemed to writhe and twist just beyond the reach of the light, hungry and waiting. I had to find a way out, but the storm outside was relentless, and I had no vehicle. I went back to my room, heart pounding in my chest. As I reached my door, I heard a soft, familiar voice.
"Emma, it's me. Open up."
It was my sister's voice. I hadn't seen her in years, and the sound of it nearly broke me. But I knew she couldn't be there. The realization struck me like a cold slap. "You're not real," I whispered. "You're not real." The voice changed, becoming low and menacing.
"Let me in, Emma.
It hissed.
Let me in."
I backed away, clutching the lamp like a weapon. The voice continued to plead, to threaten, but I refused to open the door. Eventually, the voice faded, and I was left in silence, my heart pounding in my ears. The dawn came slowly, the first light creeping over the horizon. The motel was eerily quiet, the parking lot deserted. I ventured out, my legs trembling. The other rooms were empty, the guests gone, their belongings left behind as if they had vanished into thin air. I walked down the road, my only thought to get away from that place. I reached the nearest town hours later, exhausted and drenched. The people there listened to my story with skepticism, their eyes filled with pity. No one believed me, of course. Why would they? The Whispering Pines Motel was just an ordinary place, after all. But I knew the truth. I had seen the darkness that lurked there, the thing that hunted in the night. And I knew I would never forget the horrors I had witnessed. To this day, I avoid driving at night. The memory of that night, the faces of the people who disappeared, and the sound of that voice still haunt me. The Whispering Pines Motel stands as a reminder that even the most ordinary places can hide the most unimaginable terrors.